started with a kind of broader interest when I went to graduate school in understanding the factors that were affecting, in particular, low-income communities and communities of color. What are the ways that policy and government are affecting their lives? I started talking to people like Mabel, who is an African-American woman who lived on the south side of Chicago. She talks about the American nightmare. She talks about having to choose between food and medicine. Probably the first half a dozen people that I talked to, everyone was bringing up healthcare. A lot of people thought about healthcare as something that was in the purview of the government to provide. So it wasn't really clear to me what difference it would make in people's lives politically to receive Medicaid. Over 90% of non-elderly Medicaid beneficiaries are living in poverty or near poverty, and over 50% are Black or Latino. So to the extent that we want to think about policy feedback in the context of inequality, Medicaid is an important policy for thinking about that. So I found the Fragile Families and Child Well-Being Study. What's unique about this population? It may be drug and alcohol dependence, depression, incarceration, the kinds of things we associate with economically marginal populations. Even when I did these various things, that core relationship stayed. What I didn't understand at this point was why. It turned out that geographic context was really important. People talked about things like stigma and the various ways that they were stigmatized as they were utilizing the benefits that Medicaid had to offer. And then people also talked about negative bureaucratic interactions of various kinds. I opened the book with Terry, and Terry was a Black woman that I interviewed in Georgia. She tells me about all of the differences in Medicaid state to state and how hard it has been keeping up with that. It became very clear to me in this conversation that this was political for Terry. John actually grew up middle class, but he has a chronic illness. John was living in Michigan, but many of his friends and family had moved to Arizona. But when he checked to see if the benefits that he got in Michigan would be available in Arizona, he found out that a lot of them would not. So he realized there's no way he could move there. He'd be putting his life at stake. Beyond states, I actually think about other sort of entities, other geographic entities. I think about how county bureaucratic structures affect appeal processes in neighborhoods that are suffering from more structural disadvantage. There's a negative relationship between Medicaid and political participation, but in other kinds of neighborhoods, there's not. Fragmentation across states and localities can be sort of negative in this way, but it can also be helpful and be enabling. It could give activist ideas. This overarching argument that, well, Medicaid's bad for democracy is not true. It depends on how it's implemented. There's leverage for structuring people's relationships with Medicaid via policy in ways that are actually a boon to democracy. By identifying that larger institutional context as federalism as an important piece of this puzzle, we know more, which can actually enable us to change things.